F1 on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
Second practice for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix is about to get underway on a dry and warm day in the capital city of Baku. Welcome to the Radio 5 live coverage with me, Ben Edwards, as I'm joined by BBC F1 correspondent Andrew Benson and Autosport editor-in-chief Rebecca Clancy. Beck, we saw an impressive performance from Max Verstappen to set the pace in first practice, but it's close with Mercedes, McLaren and Ferrari, and we never quite got to see how rapid Charles Leclerc was going to be, because he was one of those to make contact with the barriers quite early on in the session.
Yeah, he looked quite promising in the early stages, didn't he, until he threw it into the wall at turn 15, which was a shame. A bit of damage to his suspension, but we fully expect him to be out for FP2.
And he is competitive here. Andrew, you were mentioning just how rapid Charles Leclerc can be around Baku, but actually we saw not just Ferrari looking pretty competitive, McLaren and Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton showed some good pace earlier today too.
He did, but the one that really stood out for me, Ben, was Verstappen. You know, they've not been as bad as perhaps the impression has been in the last few races, but they certainly were struggling in Monza 2 weeks ago. They've come to Baku with a new floor on that car, and which they hope, with some rapid turnaround, which they hope is going to fix some of the problems they were having in Monza with balance. And Max Verstappen's been impressive from the off. I think Leclerc looked like he was going to be the quickest guy in that first session if he hadn't stacked it halfway through. We'll get another look in this second session now, but if anyone thought that it was going to be an easy job for Lando Norris to close 8 points a race on Max Verstappen between now and Abu Dhabi, then I think today may have given them some pause for thought.
Absolutely right. Well, we shall wait and see how it all works out. Charles Leclerc did not get to run the soft tyres because of his accident. He was running on the mediums before that, so we never got to see the full competitive pace. But it's a beautiful afternoon in Baku. Temperature just under 30 degrees, track temperature just under 40 degrees, a bit of sun around, and it's a lovely place. It's sitting at the largest below sea level city anywhere in the world, nicknamed the City of Winds, but actually it's not too windy today. There is a bit of breeze, but it's not as windy as it can be at times, and so that won't affect the cars in quite the same way, because of course it is one of the longest tracks. It's the fourth longest of the 2024 season at 3.7 miles in length, and with a very long final straight, a 2.1 kilometre pit straight, which we see flat out. And it was interesting comparing the speeds in a straight line and speeds through corners, because it actually looked like Red Bull were quick through the slow corners, whereas Mercedes were particularly quick in a straight line. There's lovely heritage and history here as well in Baku, and we have now seen this will actually be the 8th Grand Prix to be held. 7th as the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, because the first one was actually called the European Grand Prix back in 2016. But it has become a popular place, even though they've moved it slightly later in the year now. So this is the first time it's been in autumn officially. So Verstappen fastest in that first practice session, setting the pace very impressively actually just towards the end of that session. Hamilton second fastest, Sergio Perez was third, Lando Norris fourth, Carlos Sainz was fifth, and Oscar Piastri completed the top six. And we're just bearing in mind, of course, that Leclerc was not the only one to crash. So did Franco Colapinto, and actually we're just looking inside the Williams garage at the moment. Looks as though he's all ready to come back out.
He's ready, but his car is still in the air and it's got no tyres on it, so he will definitely be hoping to get out. But yeah, as you say, he's got his helmet on, but that car doesn't quite look ready, does it? And actually, I just have an update for you, because we know Ocon had issues with his PU in FP1, missed quite a lot of running. And Alpine have now said that after an MGU-H issue on Ocon's car, the team have replaced the power unit ahead of the second practice, and that is from the existing pool, so it won't cause him any penalties.
Okay, well that's good news, but it was a bit of a tough one for Alpine. Gasly was 18th, and Ocon with that power unit problem, he ended up last because he never got a decent lap in. Charles Leclerc's all ready to go, so that's good news. They've obviously repaired his car. Colapinto hopefully will be getting back out. Fernando Alonso didn't show much pace early on, but did move up to 7th later on in the session, and he's gone well here in the past, so we'll see how Aston Martin behave. And Daniel Ricciardo, well, he was inside the top 10 just about, and we see how their car also works around this very distinctive track. Andrew, it's got a lot of slow corners, but then, as I say, it's got a lot of very long straights, so you need that straight line speed.
Yes, and that's why Alpine are down at the bottom of the time sheets. They've got the worst engine in Formula One, or the least best, if you want to be polite about it. That's why Renault management are considering whether to completely abandon the F1 engine program for that, for 2026. I don't think that officially that decision hasn't been made yet. So we're waiting to see, I think sometime this month. But it's interesting. So on the Red Bull straight line speed, Ben, one of the things that was affecting them in Monza was that they didn't have a Monza specific low downforce wing, whereas and they were running more wing than a lot of the other cars. Some of that was to do with balance, because the issue that the drivers have been having in the last few races is basically a nervous rear end. They're not confident to commit into on corner entry. That obviously naturally leads them to put more rear downforce on to help the rear stick, but then they end up with understeer. So they were caught between those two horses. They could never get a balance that worked between those two problems. I noticed they're still running a relatively big-ish wing on the Red Bull this weekend, but that new floor, at least on initial indications, does look like it might have begun to address some problems. We've certainly not heard over the radio so far any of the complaints that we've been hearing from Verstappen quite regularly over the last few races about how he's not been happy with the handling of the car. And he's not backward in coming forward, Verstappen, when he's not unhappy. Of course, we only get to hear the radio transmissions that Formula One choose to give to us. But I think if Verstappen had been complaining vociferously, they would have chosen to give it to us by now, and so far he hasn't been.
Okay, fair enough. Well, it's good to know. We're just about to see Nico Hülkenberg head out onto track. Verstappen, interestingly, has gone out on a set of softs. Most are going out on mediums at this stage, and there was definitely quite a difference between being out on the softs. But yes, just looking at Max Verstappen picking up pace already, he is on a set of softs. Red Bull's history here is to have taken 4 victories in Baku. Sergio Perez has taken 2 of those 4 wins. Daniel Ricciardo, when he was driving for Red Bull, took a win in 2017, and Max Verstappen won it in 2022. He was unlucky another time when he had a tyre failure and came back in. In fact, he has come straight back in. Those softs are coming off, and a new set of mediums are going on. So yeah, that was obviously just a little bit of a play really to go out on a set of used softs, I think, and now he's going out on mediums like everybody else at this stage. Let's listen to Leclerc.
Is everything okay on data?
For now, we don't see anything strange.
Check from left to right. Single feels heavy on one side compared to the other. Light on the right corners, heavy on the left corners.
Beck, that's funny, because we were listening to Lando Norris say something like that about his McLaren earlier on, weren't we? And now he's talking about this with his Ferrari.
Yeah, almost identical complaint, isn't it? It's one of the things watching these images as well of the cars going around and pulling out of the garage as well. The amount of dirt that's still out there, that's going to play its part this hour that we've got now for practice.
You're absolutely right. When you're online, then you're pretty clear, aren't you? But if you get offline at all, it's very dusty, dirty, and we've seen a few people running pretty wide already.
Yeah, and losing the back end of the car because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even here we can see, the wind is blowing a bit of stuff around as well, so that makes life tricky. We're just riding on board with Charles Leclerc at the moment, who's got this tremendous heritage of the last 3 pole positions here at Baku, but he's never won the race. There was a race where he was leading it and he looked to be in good form, but the power unit failed. So he's not always had the luck here either. He did have the crash this morning and he's now beginning to pick it up. He's on the medium tyres and immediately he's putting together some good sequences. He's up into this tighter section. This is quite a fun little section here, isn't it?
Yeah, this is quite exciting. But this is a bit more like the go-kart section, isn't it, coming through the castle, and it's very tight, very twisty. This track it has the long straights and then it has this really tight, twisty section. So it's a great challenge for the drivers, and they actually do really enjoy driving here. And we obviously have the long DRS, and that we get some great racing.
He's just gone through turn 15, which was the place where he had his accident earlier on. It's quite a plunge downhill into turn 16, which is a very important exit because you're basically then flat out for a very long way. There are some little curves here that take them onto what is effectively the pit straight, but it is flat out through those curves. It's amazing, actually. I remember walking around the track and thinking, how can you go flat out around here? Because you can't see the exit when you're walking around there, and yet they are completely flat out through those sections.
I remember the first time time I ever ran the track. We're very fortunate. Thursday night, a lot of us, we run the tracks. It's a great way for us to get to know them, and the drivers, a lot of them, you see them out there on the track on their scooters or their bikes. I always remember going through the very narrow castle section, and the thing that a lot of people do is you lie down to try and get a real sense of how little space there is, and you touch your toes and stretch out your arms, and it's quite amazing. You get a real sense of the challenge that they face on this track. Hamilton Radio.
This damn windshield is taking away my vision. I need to come in. It's super distracting.
And Lucy, if we just keep temping it, they'll get that windshield removed.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. He's talking about his windshield causing a little bit of a problem for Lewis Hamilton. So they're going to make a little bit of a change there, which is quite intriguing. The lap that Charles Leclerc has set, a 145.8 on the medium compounds. Not bad, because the fastest lap in FP1 was 145.5 by Verstappen on the softs. But Verstappen is on a lap right now to give us a comparison. And as we mentioned, although he went out on a new set of softs initially, he is now pushing quite hard on a brand new set of mediums. So this will be a comparable lap, and he's up quite a lot, particularly in the middle sector. He's already 4/10 up. But as we were saying before, every time they go out, they're cleaning the track up more and more. We're getting faster and faster times. It will be slightly different when we get to qualifying. The track, in theory, will be clearer. It depends if we get any rain, of course, in the meantime. But let's just see what Verstappen does as he is about to go over the line. Leclerc, Sainz, Ferrari 1-2 at the moment. That's about to be defeated, yes, because he does a 145.5. Interestingly, again, in the middle sector, the Red Bull very quick, but it's not as fast in the straight line sections as some of the other cars. We're on board with Perez now, through turn 15, right up to the wall, but making it work. I remember him crashing up at that top part one time when he was some years ago, when it looked like he was going to qualify right up front nearly, and then got a penalty as well. But he has always gone well, and in fact fastest in both first and second sectors now as he comes through those flat out curves that lead down towards the start-finish straight. Charles Leclerc is also on another pretty rapid lap. Leclerc.
I mean, check the data, but I think the car is bent somewhere.
Perez goes fastest. Perez 144.5. That's quite a big chunk faster than teammate Max Verstappen. So as ever, we're seeing Sergio Perez looking good here in Baku, whereas Leclerc is clearly worried about having bent the car earlier on and it's been repaired. It's not actually feeling quite right for him, is it?
No, he's not happy about that at all. That is a brilliant lap by Perez, though, nearly a second quicker than Verstappen. Andrew was talking about it in first practice, actually. There is something about street circuits that bring the best out in Perez.
No, you're absolutely right. He is astonishing sometimes on street tracks. Let's have a look at what Lando Norris has been up to. Just looking back at a little replay as he came down to that turn 16 corner, which is so important to get a good exit, because that leads you onto the curve through onto the start-finish straight. Yeah, he got that wrong, ran over the curb, and that means that he probably would not have got the perfect exit on a lap there. That is so important, and of course, if you don't get that right, you've got another long trip round the track before you can start another rapid lap. Carlos Sainz on track at the moment, putting together a reasonable first sector. Leclerc.
Any updates, please?
Yes, we're happy to continue. We are still waiting for feedback on what we see.
I don't think he's going to be very happy with that feedback, is he? Didn't really tell him anything.
No.
He's complaining about the car and they're telling him to stay out there and it all looks okay, basically.
They're obviously waiting for data to be analysed and give them some information, but it's taking longer than Leclerc is hoping. As you say, he wants some information straight away. We've got a yellow flag out sector 2, whether somebody's just run a bit deep. And Carlos didn't really get turn 15 quite right there, but he's stayed off the wall, which is the important thing. I think he's backed off a bit now. That was his teammate up ahead. He's definitely slowed it right down. He was on a decent first sector initially. So it's Sergio Perez who has set the initial pace. Yuki Tsunoda's done a pretty good job. It's surprising. Leclerc again.
Yeah, guys, I'm not driving with this car anymore. I'm pitting.
I mean, this is super frustrating. We mentioned earlier he crashed in FP1. He's losing time. You can't drive a car through any track when you don't have the confidence in it. So he's right, there's absolutely no point in him being out there because he can't push. They're not going to get the data that they need because he's not going to the limits of what the car is capable of and he's capable of. So he may as well come in and they fix it. Leclerc again.
It's impossible, you cannot see that on data. Impossible. it's not straight.
Copy box.
I think he was already coming in at that point. So Charles is not happy with the feel of this car. They're going to have to put it back into the garage and maybe do another setup on it to make sure that everything's pointing in the right direction. And you would think they could have done that, but of course they've only had a certain amount of time to repair the car and then put it all together. And putting the setup correctly, something he feels has gone slightly wrong with that. Just looking at Carlos Sainz, did he touch? Oh, he just touched the barrier, but literally touched it, didn't he?
Yeah, that was more than a little flirt, I would say. That was probably a pretty hair-raising moment for him. And yeah, Charles, this is just a replay we're watching now of Charles Leclerc really struggling to drive that car.
Yeah, and that was down at the corner where he did hit the barrier earlier today. He decided not to even try and go around the corner at turn 15. He just went straight down the escape road and managed to turn the car around. Meanwhile, for McLaren, Lando Norris is on a reasonable lap at the moment. Oscar Piastri is currently 4th fastest. Lando Norris hasn't really put together a lap as yet, but he is doing so right now, just going past his teammate who's trying to keep out of the way. But there is quite a lot of traffic out there at this point. That can be tricky. I think everyone is keeping out of his way currently. Lewis Hamilton also on a reasonable lap, but just looking at the sector times, this is not coming together quite so well for Lando in comparison to Sergio Perez, is it?
No, McLaren don't look as strong as they did this morning. I mean, Red Bull were very clearly quick. Obviously, Verstappen put in that great time right at the end of the first practice, but Norris seems to be struggling to tie it all together. He's gone green, so he's having his best sectors, but it's not exactly a standout lap from him at this stage.
Andrew, how crucial do you think this stage of the season is for McLaren? Because, you know, that they lost that potential win at Monza last time out. We're now going into 2 weekends in a row before there's a bit more of a gap, and then going into that final blast. Surely it is quite an important stage for McLaren to keep up that pace that we have seen from them. They've regularly been doing a good job. Listen to Verstappen.
Like literally at the apex, the car just understeers.
So Max getting a bit too much understeer, but yeah. So thoughts on McLaren?
Well, you're right. The pressure's definitely on them now. The Constructors' Championship looks very winnable. They're 8 points behind Red Bull. They've closed up a lot. Until recently, well, basically, including recently, Red Bull have only had one driver scoring points, effectively, or large amounts of points, whereas McLaren have had 2. They've had, on average, the fastest car certainly in the second part of the season, sort of from summer onwards. It's actually very, very close between Red Bull and McLaren on average, even from Miami, even from the McLaren upgrade, if you do the overall sort of absolute pace. So it's not like they're dominating in any way, and Norris keeps saying we're not really, you know, we may have had the average fastest car, but we've not really had many weekends where we're dominating. I think they had 1 or 2 actually, Zandvoort and Hungary. Everything else has always been close. Hamilton's complaining about hot seat again,
as he was earlier.
Yeah, that's obviously going to be a bit of a recurring theme for Mercedes on these tracks with long straights, I think. I think we can assume from this it's not so much to do with air temperature, it's more to do with grounding, probably. Although it is quite warm in Baku, 29 degrees, it's not quite as hot as it was in Monza 2 weeks ago. I think one of the things about McLaren that's interested me is I think they've surprised themselves to be in this position, and I think that's why they haven't made this team orders call earlier than they have. It's because they didn't really believe that the Drivers' Championship could be possible. A, because Verstappen was so far ahead, and B, because they didn't have the confidence in themselves to think that they would be quick on every racetrack, because they haven't been. There've been tracks even since they had the fabled Austria upgrade in the middle of last year. There've been tracks that they've been quick at, but tracks that they haven't been so quick at. They assumed that pattern would continue, and it's almost like they'd thought themselves into a defensive position. And in lots of other ways, I think they're not quite ready to go toe-to-toe with Red Bull. Their strategy decisions have been questionable this year, to say the least, at certain times. And now they suddenly find themselves with the average fastest car just. And there are questions about whether they're making the most of it. on a number of different levels. We're getting a replay of Verstappen doing something here.
Yeah, let's just have a little look. We had some yellow flags out. I was wondering if this... Oh, Max. Oh, my goodness. He locked up and didn't quite hit the barrier. My goodness, that was close to hitting it. He braked late, and then you wondered whether he was going to actually make it, but he did, without going into the barrier. That's down at turn 5, isn't it? And that was quite close, but thankfully no actual damage done. In the meantime, Carlos Sainz has gone fastest. But yeah, what you're saying, I think it's very interesting, that the battle that is going on between them.
Yeah, and they've thought themselves now, they've seen Verstappen struggling in Monza and thought, actually, maybe the Drivers' Championship is on. Actually, is it though? Because as Beck was saying earlier, Verstappen may well have won Spa if he hadn't had the engine penalty from pole position. He was second in Zandvoort. He didn't have a great weekend in Hungary, but he's been quick pretty much everywhere else.
Yeah.
Apart from Monza, we've got another car, a Sauber's gone down the escape road. Interestingly, on Red Bull though, we've just had a shot of Ferrari obviously doing quite a lot of work on Charles Leclerc's car, because the mechanics are doing the usual standing in front of the car being a barrier.
They are hiding it away, aren't they?
It's interesting though for Red Bull, for me, this session so far, again, there's a standout impression in a different way from before. Yes, they're both quick, but we didn't hear any complaints, as I was saying a few minutes ago, from Verstappen in first practice. Suddenly he's complaining about understeer, which is what he's been complaining about for the last few races. He's just locked up at either turn 3 or turn 5. I'm not quite sure which one of those two left-handers it was. And very nearly had an accident with understeer, Ben, because that's what happened. He ploughed straight on. So I suspect maybe Red Bull, maybe Formula One have sold us a bit of a pup there, and maybe their first session wasn't quite as smooth as it appeared to be from the outside.
We shall see. And that was Zhou Guanyu, who he went down at turn 3, had to do a bit of a spin. He went down the escape road, so that was a little bit of a challenge. Nico Hülkenberg, we're just having a little replay on board with Nico, so we're going up the tight section. This is him.
Checo thinks we're racing.
So we're going very slowly up the hill, but I don't know quite why he says Checo thinks we're racing. He just wasn't getting out of the way, I suppose. And they were both going pretty slowly, weren't they?
Yeah, they were both pretty slow. Can I just give you a quick update on George Russell, who is still in the garage? Mercedes found a problem with his engine right at the end of the break between the two sessions, so that is being changed. He could be out for about half an hour or so. It's not a quick job to change an engine. He will be hoping he can get out at some point in this session, but there's only 43 minutes on the clock, so that's not great for Mercedes.
That's not good news. No, that's a shame. Right, it's good to see that Franco Colapinto is back out, though, in the Williams. He crashed the Williams earlier on in first practice. He's the young Argentinian who's going into his second ever Grand Prix event, and now having replaced Logan Sargent at Williams, obviously he's trying to build up his knowledge of this place. He's never raced at Baku before. We're listening in on Pierre Gasly as we ride on board with him around the track. This is a track that Alpine know is not particularly going to suit them very well. Esteban Ocon now with that change of power unit. He's down in 18th place. Gasly currently down in 19th place, and it is only Russell, who hasn't been out on track, who's behind them in 20th place. But this just gives us a little opportunity to watch as he comes around the lap. He's now going into the tight section up the hill through turn 7, climbing up the hill through the classic part of Baku, through this incredibly narrow section where you would really never be able to run side by side with anybody, but then opening up a little bit into a fairly straight line section, flat out little curves before getting into that all-important turn 15, the dropping downhill, the crash that we saw from Charles Leclerc earlier, and we have seen plenty in the past. Pierre Gasly gets through there nicely, right out to the edge, back down the hill and into the all-important last corner before you're flat out for such a long distance. For 2.2 kilometres now he's flat out, which will include crossing over the line. So he's doing some personal bests. It'll be interesting to see where this puts Gasly, because this will be a bit more of a relevant performance. Hülkenberg up in 10th place in the Haas, by the way. That's another good effort. And Oliver Behrman 13th quickest in the other Haas, so they'll both be relatively pleased. Let's see where Gasly goes. Only 16th. He goes ahead of his teammate Esteban Ocon, and he goes ahead of Franco Colapinto, Zhou Guanyu, and he also goes ahead of George Russell. Jack Doohan, a driver who is currently reserved for Alpine, but who will be driving full-time for them next year. And yeah, a smile on his face, knowing his future coming along. I'm sure he'd love to be out there like Oliver Behrman is, but well, he's just going to have to wait for his opportunity to be out on circuit. Looks as though there might be a change of helmet for Max. So, yeah, he's getting ready to come back out on circuit again. But as we heard, he wasn't particularly happy with the balance. Alex Albon's done a good job. Alex Albon currently up in 5th place. They've all been running on the medium compound tyre, although now out on a soft compound, Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki, who is currently in 8th position. So we'll see if that soft tyre starts to be brought into use by some of the others at this stage. We're in second practice at the moment, and of course there's a lot of work going on both for how the car's going to react over a single flying lap for qualifying, but they will also work then on race pace and try and understand how the tyres are going to last here. Quite often it can be just a single stop race. It's not a particularly demanding track on tyres, is it, Andrew?
No, and I was saying earlier, Ben, wasn't I, when Leclerc crashed in that first session, that it wasn't such a bad timing potentially, because he'd had some decent running up to then, and he'd missed half an hour. But as long as everything went okay in second session, shouldn't affect his weekend too much. It's now actually looking really quite problematic for him. I don't know what. I mean, it's obviously his fault that he crashed the car. Otherwise, Ferrari wouldn't have had to take it apart and put it back together again. They've obviously made some kind of error putting the car back together. Doing that and finding that sort of problem, it's not the easiest thing to solve in a 1 hour practice session, which is quite tightly packed. You know, they have a very strict program. You know, they do a bit of setup work on a medium tyre, then they do qualifying simulation runs on the soft tyre, which is what we're starting to see now. Then they do about 20 minutes or so of race simulation running at the end of the session. Leclerc, if he's not careful, he's going to miss out on quite a large part of that. So actually it's beginning to look now that crash this morning, not this morning, in the first session, sorry, that's old habits dying hard there, could actually impinge on his weekend quite significantly.
That's a very good point. We shall see how Leclerc gets on in the remainder of this. We're watching Yuki Tsunoda, and we're actually riding on board with him. Yuki's got good background here. He's always managed to get into Q3 in the top 10 qualifying here at Baku in the past. He scored points on 2 occasions. Best finish 7th place. That was in 2021. Last year he managed to get a point for 10th, even though he'd had an accident in the sprint race, but thankfully that didn't affect him so much for the main race. So Tsunoda always going well at Baku. It is funny how we have this sort of list of drivers, and we've been talking about Perez as well, of course, who always goes well here, but it does seem to suit Yuki Tsunoda quite well.
Yeah, he does do very well here. There is a funny thing, like you say, Ben, the drivers who do very well on street circuits, it just suits their style of driving. It's how they operate, whether it's they just do better with they always low grip surfaces, they always evolve through the weekend, and they just seem to be able to find something that perhaps the drivers who are better on the more traditional circuits, where they're more bedded in, let's say, they just perform very well. And Tsunoda, I mean, he's arguing quite loudly that he should be promoted to the top team, and that's what he's fighting for at the moment, to be boosted up to the full-time Red Bull seat. He thinks he should be there instead of Perez, and this is a good weekend for him to show off his skills, isn't it, if he goes well here?
It is, no, and he's doing a reasonable lap at the moment, I have to say. Carlos Sainz has still got the fastest lap, 1:44.323 ahead of Sergio Perez. Lewis Hamilton third fastest from Max Verstappen and Alex Albon, but on soft tyres now, and we are seeing a few more coming out on soft tyres, but Yuki Tsunoda is one of the first to go out and do a flying lap on the soft tyres. He goes third quickest, a 1:44.6. So this gives us a little bit of an indication. We're going to see some rapid times coming through now, and let's see who's going to be quickest. We're already faster than we saw in FP1. We're down into the 1:44s. We were in the 45s earlier on today, and Yuki Tsunoda popping up into third place, using that good history he has around this track, the 24-year-old, and he'll be looking for his 80th Grand Prix to be another point scorer. Still, the Ferrari crew are hiding away Charles Leclerc's car, so the camera, we've got a camera in front of us just trying to have a look and see what they're working on, but we can't tell.
Well, it just got a glimpse right at the very start before someone moved across. They've taken off pretty much, looks like the whole back of the car. That's obviously very sensitive. You don't want your other team seeing that, which is why they form this wall. But that doesn't look like a quick job, as Andrew was saying. These cars are so complicated. Leclerc's talking about how the car's bent. You'd love to be able to just get a spirit level and whack it into shape and straighten it up, which is probably what they did back in the day, but that's unfortunately not how they do it now. The electronics, they're just so complicated, but it did look like they had taken the entire back of that car off, so he may well end up missing this session.
He might, and you almost wonder, don't you, whether, he went in front first on that accident. It looked like it was just the front of the car. Maybe something at the back of the car had happened and they didn't notice it because the damage looked like it was all at the front. Remember back to Monaco in 2022, was it? When he put it on pole, but he crashed on his last run in qualifying, and they checked the car overnight, and they were convinced there was nothing wrong with it, but they didn't check the drive shaft. I mean, duh. And lo and behold, he drove out to the grid, and the car broke. That was a previous Ferrari era under Mattia Binotto, the team principal, who was sacked at the end of 2022 as a partial consequence of those sorts of mistakes, and replaced by Frédéric Vasseur. But I'm not saying that is what's happened, but it's the sort of thing that it looks like it might have done. That something was missed in their...
sorry to interrupt, but Lando Norris was on a really good lap, and he's just been held up on the last stage of the corners. What a great shame that is, because he was on a very rapid lap. He's now going to have to back off on the soft tyres and hope that they will last again for another lap. Meanwhile, Carlos Sainz is on a good lap on the soft tyres now. He had set fast his first sector, but that's just been taken by Max Verstappen. So Verstappen, as he was earlier on today, is showing tremendous pace, not necessarily on every sector, but certainly the first two sectors. Straight line speed maybe not quite as rapid. We're still riding with Carlos Sainz at this stage and waiting to see where this puts him. As I mentioned earlier, he has always been out-qualified by a teammate here in Baku in the past, but he's getting a lot more laps in than Charles Leclerc right now. Albon's just gone fourth fastest in the Williams. That's another good effort by Alexander Albon. And Sainz does go, he is fastest. He was already quickest. He's gone quicker, 143.9. But I think Verstappen might be even faster than that, don't you, Beck?
Yeah, he's nearly half a second up just after the second sector. He's gone fastest in the first and second sector now. He looks like he's absolutely flying. Obviously, we know he's going to be quicker in the second sector. That's the Red Bull are definitely the fastest car through the slow corners. He may well not be as quick in the third sector, but he's half a second up, so he's got a bit of time to play with.
Yeah, no, I think we are going to see a new fastest time coming up here from Max Verstappen as he blasts over the line. Oh, actually, he misses out by a few hundredths of a second. He goes second, 79 thousandths of a second to be accurate. Oliver Behrman does another good job. He goes fourth fastest in the Haas. How about that? With the soft tyres on board. We'll wait to see what Hülkenberg does. He hasn't done it yet. Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton's on a lap as well.
It's pretty clear that Red Bull have gone one way on setup. They've put more downforce on the car. They're hoping to make up lap time in the corners, basically. He's losing so much time on that last straight. And it's going to be, if they stick with that, it's going to be really, I think partly it'll be to do with tyre wear in the race. The more downforce you have on the car, the more it looks after the tyres. As Hamilton's coming close to the line now, Ben. But whether they stick with that for the rest of the weekend is going to be interesting to see.
Hamilton goes third fastest, so he isn't quite as rapid as Verstappen, and a little bit off Carlos Sainz as well. A couple of tenths away from the fastest so far. So it's still Carlos Sainz topping the list at this stage with the out on soft tyres. This could be ultimately the sort of deciding laps for the ultimate pace before they start going into race technology for later on in this session. We're just having a little look at Lando Norris in the background, little replay. This was when he got held up, and it was very, very unfortunate. And it's Pierre Gasly. He was actually in his way, and it was an unfortunate place for him to catch up to him. So that really did mess up a lap. So whether he's going to get another chance, Pierre Gasly, let's listen to him.
I had a problem. I have a problem with the battery. I'm sorry.
Well, he's actually apologising on the radio for getting in the way of Lando Norris, saying he had a problem with the battery, but he stayed out. He didn't actually come into the pit, so I don't quite know what was going on there, but he was obviously aware that he had rather messed things up at that point. So Franco Colapinto is now out on the soft tyres in the Williams. I wonder if he's going to be able to match Alex Albon, who's gone ninth. Meanwhile, Hülkenberg's done his lap on the soft, but he's nowhere near Oliver Behrman. There's about 4/10 of a second between them. Behrman is sixth, and Hülkenberg currently 11th, so that's really impressive by the youngster Ollie, isn't it?
He's been impressive all day, hasn't he? He was quicker than Hülkenberg in first practice, and now he's showing what Haas can look forward to when he gets that full-time race seat next year. Looks like a very good decision from Komatsu, who's the team principal there.
Yeah, no, that is really good. Oliver Behrman, who, remember, stood in for Carlos Sainz earlier this year for his first Grand Prix, scored points for Ferrari. Well, has he got a chance of scoring points in his second Grand Prix with a different team? Right now, if this was qualifying, he'd have a chance.
He struggled a lot with visibility, man. Lots of with his sun.
The sun is dropping, and in certain areas around this track, as Max Verstappen was saying on radio there, it's actually getting pretty difficult. We've got some interesting camera shots as well, that as that sun is dropping away, it does make life a little bit difficult, there's no doubt. 5:30 local time, and it's interesting that Max Verstappen is clearly struggling with that, isn't he?
Yeah, you can see how long the shadows are being cast around the track, and obviously they're facing every which way when they go around this, and that camera angle we just saw, actually, it's glaring straight into the lens, and that's exactly what's happening to them. It goes straight into their visor, and I'm sure there probably are a few seconds around this track that they can't see anything.
Yeah, absolutely right. So we shall see if anybody else has that problem. Right now, Piastri is now second fastest to Carlos Sainz. The gap only 0.033. So that is showing us again that we've got a Ferrari, a McLaren, a Red Bull and a Mercedes in the top 4 places. So all of these teams that have taken at least 3 victories each are in the top 4 places right now on the soft tyres. Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull and Mercedes, and that's really what we love to see, because it makes it really wide open again going into this event.
It's been a great year, hasn't it, for this championship? We all came in thinking, off the back of last year, Red Bull winning 21 of 22 races, that they would continue their domination, and actually of the top teams, they're the only one who haven't had both of their drivers win a race. Ferrari, McLaren and Mercedes, both of their drivers have won, and actually you wouldn't have guessed at the start of the year that it'd be Red Bull who missed out.
Yeah, I think this is turning into a day where we're going to get to the end of this session and think we don't really know what's going on here.
But that's good, isn't it?
It is, but because
I feel like that at the end of most today.
Well, yeah, exactly. I won't say anything. The fastest driver in a Ferrari has got problems.
Yeah.
The fastest driver in qualifying in a Mercedes has got problems. The fastest driver in a McLaren has been blocked by a bloke not looking in his mirrors. So we don't actually know the pace of those cars. Beck's pointing at something on the screen. Perez is going for another run. Russell's just coming out to the pits. Thank you for pointing us out. Yeah, he's on the hard tyre though, just like Hamilton was for his first run.
Perez is having a good run here. It was a very good first sector. He's actually sliding it around quite a lot.
Yeah, so I think we're going to go, if Leclerc doesn't get out, and even if he does, he's going to have had a compromised session. If Norris doesn't do another run on the softs, it doesn't look like he is going to, because he's in the pits now, so I suspect he's preparing for his race run. We're not going to get a proper look into who's quick, I don't think, that's the end of today.
Lance Stroll's just popped up to 4th place, and Perez, meanwhile, is on a very good lap. But as we know, as he goes down the straight, looking at Verstappen earlier, it's not as quick down the final straight. Mind you, he's still on target, potentially, to take the top spot from Carlos Sainz. You can hear it hitting the road a little bit. We can hear that from the onboard, so they're running it low, and the downforce is knocking it. He does go quickest though, and actually he loses less time down the straight than Verstappen does, or did earlier. He's gone 0.4 of a second faster than Carlos Sainz. That is a big jump, and Sergio Perez, the most successful driver here in Baku, with the only one to have won it twice before, he's gone fastest once again here.
That's really interesting, because the advantage that he had coming out of the second sector matched what Verstappen had when we thought he was on a flyer, but Verstappen couldn't then capitalise out on the third sector, and it actually didn't go fastest, but Perez has held on to the advantage, and it was almost identical after the second and third sector.
They just put the sectors up, and you're absolutely right. He's virtually the same as Verstappen through sector 1 and sector 2, but miles quicker through sector 3. So you're absolutely right. It's got the straight line speed. Whether it's always a difficult one to know in practice, because sometimes they run the engines a little bit more cautiously if it's done a lot of mileage. They don't want to run it to full pace. We're just watching Max Verstappen. Oh, he had another little mishap. He's not looking as happy now as he was earlier today.
No, he's not. And to Andrew's point earlier, I suspect that they're probably running slightly different setups on the car, because as you say, if you run more downforce, you're obviously better in that second sector. So perhaps flirting around with what they're running, how much wing they're running, just to see how it works. And it looks like for Perez it's working a bit better on his car.
Yeah, but he likes a different feel from the car.
He does.
Max, doesn't he?
Yeah, and Verstappen really does not look happy in this car, does he, this afternoon, compared to how he was this morning. He was complaining at the start of the balance, and he wasn't very happy in that regard, and then we've heard that over the last few races. then he went quickest at the end of FP1, and now he doesn't look quite so settled anymore.
Well, we've got, is that Leclerc who's gone deep down into the escape road? I think it is. Hamilton's on a lap right now. Lewis doing a reasonable first sector, but it's not proving to be a major one. Track clear again.
So that's Leclerc on his out lap. So they've sent him out again, and he's gone straight on at that corner just before the castle section. So he's really not having a good day, Ben, is he?
No. Where he had a huge crash a few years ago.
Yeah, that's right. So that is a bit of a strange to do that on the outlap, Charles Leclerc. They've been working on this car, hiding it away. Let's have a look at the replay of what went on with him here. Oh, and it was just a straight... Well, that's Sainz. That's... I think... Is it? Yeah, that was Carlos having a bit of an off. So that was a separate one. Carlos Sainz going down an escape road. But then... Yeah, then we're just having a look at what happened. But for... Charles Leclerc on what was presumably an outlap on a separate part of the track, also going off, the Ferraris suddenly not looking quite so good as they did earlier on, because Sainz did set the pace earlier. He's still second fastest to Sergio Perez, but Perez is the one that's gone very, very rapidly indeed. We are now watching Charles Leclerc as he now gets back up to pace on these medium compounds. So he has stuck with the tyres, which makes sense in a way because he wasn't happy with the balance before. They've done something to the car. Makes sense to send him out on the same tyres and say, well, tell us if it feels different. Yeah,
these are tester laps now. I think the programme, as it were, that they would have hoped to get through in this hour is not slightly out the window, but the priority here is making sure that Leclerc is comfortable in the car, so don't waste new tyres. But that's because they have a limited number that they have to run over the weekend, so you may as well send him out, get a feel for the car. They were saying earlier that they can't see it in the data, so they're now relying on Leclerc to come back to them to say how it feels. And so, yeah, just, run through this set of tyres, and that's the priority, is the feel of the car right now.
In the meantime, further down the order, I was just looking at how the youngsters are getting on, and Oliver Behrman, who'd done that brilliant lap earlier, actually Hulkenberg with a second flying lap on the soft tyre, has managed to just sneak ahead of his teammate, as he is this weekend, replacing Kevin Magnussen, Oliver Behrman. He was quicker than Hulkenberg initially, but Hulkenberg's gone a fraction faster than Ollie Behrman. But they are 7th and 8th in the order. That's impressive in the two Haas cars. And meanwhile, Franco Colapinto's done a good job because he is only a fraction slower than Alex Albon. And the two Williams cars are just outside the top 10, 11th and 12th. That is very promising. We're still waiting for Lando Norris to do a representative lap. And we're still waiting for George Russell, of course, to do anything. Representative as well, Colapinto. Just a little bit of a replay there of him bashing the barrier. Having said he'd just done a good job, he nearly damaged the car there. Whether they're going to have to check it out, they might have to. Charles Leclerc, I saw that, had a little bit of a slide through turn one, but he got away with that. Wasn't really an issue. Still on the medium tyres, and the back end of the car sliding out of turn one, but he kept well away from the barrier, so that wasn't a major issue. But Charles is not having the day that he would often have here, and he's had 3 pole positions in a row here over the last 3 years. It's not working well for him at this stage. Max Verstappen in the pits at the moment. He's not looking quite as happy as he was earlier today. Perez, his teammate, has set the pace nearly half a second quicker than anyone else. Carlos Sainz second, Piastri third, Verstappen fourth, Lance Stroll impressively up in 5th place, ahead of Lewis Hamilton, then Hulkenberg and Behrman, as I mentioned, then Tsunoda, that good job he did early on the soft tyres. That's actually still a pretty good effort by Tsunoda. 10th place Alonso, then the two Williams, Albon just ahead of his new teammate, then Bottas in 13th place, Leclerc down in 14th place on a different pattern now, having come into the pits to get work done. Ricciardo down in 15th place, Norris also on this funny pattern, he's down in 16th place, even though he's shown some good pace here. And Max Verstappen, let's just have a look, how close to the wall? 4 centimetres, is it saying?
That's great that they can do that, isn't it? 4 centimetres is absolutely nothing, and he still drives away at full speed, foot to the floor.
So they've parked the car in now, and he's got, at turn 2, he's got the record for closest to the wall. We've got a nice figures coming up on our screen. So Gasly, the next closest, at 21 centimetres apparently. That's the bigger gap. Piastri 28 centimetres, Ocon 30 and Ricciardo 31. But Verstappen at 4 centimetres at turn 2, definitely the closest of everybody. Well, we'll see if that changes as we go through the rest of this session and through the rest of the weekend, of course. We've got just over 21 minutes still to go in this session. And George Russell, we do want to see more of. He's on the hard compound tyre. Ooh, he's slipping and sliding around a fair bit, isn't he?
The grip just isn't there, is it? Particularly when they're off the line. They could do with a couple of support series going out and laying down some rubber. They're all struggling. You see every team seems to be struggling, the back end flipping out. They just don't quite have the grip they need to be able to push. He's out on hard, so I imagine they're doing race simulations now, and they've had to forego the other bits of the programme that they wanted to do.
Yeah, and there's a few who've had to do that as well, because Lando Norris, he's out on a set of mediums now, having got held up on that quick lap that he was doing. So it's not at all relevant. I mean, Norris down as 16th, teammate Piastri up in third place. But we know Norris was on a lap that was right up there until he got held up. But they decided to back out of that. Don't worry, we're not going to get another quick lap on that set of softs. So let's focus on our race pace, which does make sense. Although Hamilton, interestingly, has just improved. He's done another quick lap, so he hasn't gone for race pace. Maybe they've decided to split the pattern a bit and make Russell do the race pace work and Hamilton do the single lap work.
It feels like a couple of the teams are doing that. I mentioned Red Bull with Perez and Verstappen playing around maybe with the setup of the car, and I think just having lost so much time with Russell, it makes sense really to use both cars to get the data that they need. Both two very good drivers, so actually you can get fairly reliable data off both of them, to then you're going to have to just feed it across both sides of the garage.
It's interesting that Hamilton's gone that close to 0.060 of a second to what Perez had done, because it did look as though Perez had made a big jump. Russell is currently doing race pace, absolutely 4.5 seconds off the qualifying pace, but that is race pace what he's doing. This is very, very important information that he's gaining for that Mercedes team, and they're working sensibly here. Marcus Dudley, senior race engineer, we're just taking a look at him working with George Russell. It's been a bit of a mishap for his program with that engine having to take a replacement, but at least he is out there and getting in some useful laps at this stage. Ollie Behrman out on circuit at the moment, hoping to become the first driver in F1 history to score points for two different constructors in the first two races, and there is a chance, bearing in mind the Haas cars are in the top 10 at the moment. Whether that will be the story when you get others like Norris, like Russell, getting the qualifying that they hopefully will do on Saturday, that's a different story, of course.
Meanwhile, quietly, Charles Leclerc's beginning to have a slightly better day. He's running around on those medium tyres. Obviously, they're used. He's got a reasonable amount of fuel in the car, and he's just set the 7th fastest time, just 7 tenths off the pace, which is not bad. So it suggests that they've got that car not bent anymore. So it's going to be interesting to see what Leclerc does for the remainder of the session. If he gets to run on the soft tyres, which he probably will, by then, of course, the track will be in better condition, so he'll have an advantage, as it was for Hamilton compared to Perez, for example. And the race runs, as you said, Ben, are just starting, and Lando Norris is the first one to start beginning to clock up the race laps, which I'll try and keep on top of for the next few minutes.
Thank you very much. Yes, because it's a very different lap time, as we saw with Russell. Actually, you could see the very different lap time. But as Andrew mentioned there, but the track is still cleaning up, isn't it? So we're still, if Leclerc does go out on soft tyres at the end of this session, when they've all been doing a lot of running, then in theory he could put in a mega quick lap, couldn't he?
Yeah, if he goes out on a fresh set of softs and the track has evolved as it should do over the next 17 and a half minutes we've got left, then you would expect him to put in the fastest lap. If he doesn't, well, then it's that, we actually have learnt quite a lot today. I would say that perhaps the Ferrari, they haven't fixed it the way they would, but as Andrew says, he's looking pretty good on these mediums, putting in some, so he's actually just gone back into the pits now, so I suspect they're just changing to the next part of their programme.
Yeah, he'll be trying to, I would imagine he'll try and do a truncated version of the normal programme, so a quick soft tyre run now, and then he'll try and get a few laps in on race fuel towards the end. He won't get as many laps on race fuel as everybody else is going to, but they'll if it goes to plan, they'll try and just squeeze it all in as best they can.
Ollie Behrman still on a sort of race lap now on the medium compound tyres. I'm quite intrigued that the Haas team are showing reasonable pace at the moment, because they are the only constructor that has never managed to get a car into the top 10 in qualifying, into Q3 in Baku. Yes, I do know that today doesn't count at all. It is free practice, and we've also, as I keep mentioning, seen a couple of drivers, Norris and Russell in particular, not showing showing a representative lap, but it does show that maybe that Haas could potentially get at least one of the cars into the top 10 in qualifying.
Certainly on today's performance. I mean, that's just a team going in the right direction, isn't it? They are 7th in the Constructors' Championship. They're only 6 points behind RB. The difference in prize money in that is millions of dollars, and that is huge for a team like Haas. But yeah, you would say on today's performance, Ollie Behrman has been really impressive today. I mean, his standing in for Kevin Magnussen, who's been banned, and he's got one weekend. We know that he's going to be in the seat full time next year. But it's been a very impressive day from him, and actually he's been quicker than Hülkenberg apart from right this very second. But yes, as suspected, Charles Leclerc has been in the pits and he's come back out again just to move on to Ferrari, and he is now on the soft tyre. So perhaps I suspect the Haas duo might start getting pushed down the field.
It's going to be interesting. Hopefully he'll be on low fuel and that he's not doing a sort of race run on the soft tyre. I doubt. We'll see. It's quite likely that Charles Leclerc will put in a quick lap, but let's wait and see. Valtteri Bottas is who we're watching, who's got a very good record here of leading in the past and taking a victory here in 2019. He's had a couple of podiums, but last year didn't go quite so well. He only finished down in 18th position, and the year before that he was in 11th. So it's actually been a few years now since he's actually scored points here. And amazingly, he hasn't managed to score any points at all this year. When you think a driver of his quality and the history that we'd seen when he was driving for Mercedes, the fact that he's not been able to score any points at all this year is a little sad. Whether this track will be one they can turn it around, we'll have to see. He's doing race pace at the moment, and currently in terms of outright pace from earlier on, he is 14th fastest. Now Charles Leclerc is putting together a decent first sector, so it does look as though he's still on low fuel, doesn't it? And that we are going to see a representative lap from him.
It looks like he is doing quali sims at the moment. He's setting, I should say, at the moment, his personal best in that first sector. And yes, it would suggest rather that he is on low fuel. In fact, I think he's actually just gone quickest in that first sector, has he? Or we're just about to find out.
Yeah, we're just getting...
Yes, he has. Yeah, he
that
has
was well spotted.
It's just come up on my screen. He has, not by much, a tenth of a second.
Yeah, very tight, but no, this is a good effort. So is Leclerc now going to be able to go faster than Sergio Perez, who set the pace earlier? Now bear in mind, as Andrew told us, the track is getting drier, and well, not drier, but cleaner all the time. When Hamilton set his second fastest lap, that was a little while after Perez had done his. The track is definitely improving all laps that everybody does here. So in theory, he's got a really good chance of going faster than Perez.
Well, it'll be interesting to see the time he sets through the second sector, because that's where Red Bull have been dominating. We know that they're quickest through the slow corners, and in fact he hasn't gone quickest. He is slightly off the pace, nearly a tenth. It is a personal best for him though, but he is still on course because that Ferrari is quick over a straight line, so it's not much in it, so he could still put in the quickest lap here.
We're riding on board with him. It's going to be close. Andrew still think it's going to be close, but let's wait and see. Is it going to be Perez or Leclerc? This is probably the last rapid lap that we're going to see. Yeah, he goes quickest, 0.006 of a second faster than Sergio Perez. So Charles Leclerc, he's looking for 4 poles in a row here at Baku, okay, when we get into qualifying tomorrow, but that will at least have given him some of the confidence back, because he's not had the perfect day until now, but that's given Ferraris a bit of a smile after a tough time.
Well, credit to those mechanics as well for sourcing out that car. They absolutely have done a job on that, and isn't it great for us heading into the weekend that they're so close, 0.006 of a second. That is quite amazing. Yeah, this is gearing up for a very good weekend for us.
Isn't it funny? 0.006 to Perez and then 0.066 to Hamilton is something in common.
That seems to be happening all day, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The numbers being reversed and all being in line.
But it was the same in Monza, wasn't it? The lap time difference in the first top 5, I think it was incredibly close at Monza as well. And that's what's so enjoyable about Formula 1 at this point, is that we have these 4 different teams that are all capable of going to the top step. When we started this season, it looked like Red Bull were totally dominant, and it makes it tougher for Verstappen in a way to maintain that advantage, because if you're not quite there, you're not only losing to maybe 1 or 2 drivers from a team, you could lose to 4 or 5 drivers from several different teams, because that's how close it is.
Yeah, and you look at McLaren, that's such an exciting driver lineup. Oh, and that's Carlos Sainz, who's down an escape road. Yep, just reversing himself out. and then he'll continue. Yeah, we have in McLaren, as I was saying, really exciting driver pairing in Norris and Piastri. Then you've got the great duo of Hamilton and Russell at Mercedes, and then Ferrari, Leclerc and Sainz. And you just think, actually, if Verstappen's having an off day, he's not finishing second behind Hamilton as per 2021, and Bottas, who did a great job that season as well. He has 4 or 5 cars ahead of him who can beat him, which is why we're seeing quite regularly at the moment he's finishing down in 5th and 6th.
Interestingly, we've seen Leclerc go out on soft tyres. Just noticed that George Russell has gone out on a set. Whether he is on low fuel or not, I'm not at all sure, but we'll just keep an eye on that. When he's on an out lap at the moment, we won't really know until he starts another lap. That was just having a look at Carlos Sainz, who did that rather strange run. And we've got a replay of Lando Norris going down into turn 16, where he's run wide before and he ran wide again. No damage done, just over the curb. It's just not the perfect exit. We'll see that in qualifying, all of them trying. Hulkenberg's had a lock-up. That was its turn 15, that one at the top of the hill, effectively, where Leclerc had his shunt earlier. But he didn't hit anything. He's managed to keep the car out of trouble, and he will be able to rejoin the track once again. Max Verstappen on circuit at this point. He's had a little bit of a break out of the car, but he'll be on race pace now. He's on the medium compound tyre, and will it be important just putting together these race pace elements to learn how the track is behaving. Current pace on the mediums, Piastri is actually one of the quickest, 1:48.5, quicker than Perez, and so far Verstappen hasn't done so many laps, I don't think, yet, coming back out, so we'll see a bit more comparison. But interesting that Piastri's got good race pace.
Yeah, he's very quick, and also interesting that Perez is quicker than Verstappen. I think his tyres are 2 laps older by the looks of it, and then Norris, who's done the most, it looks like, on 13 laps on that medium. But yeah, Piastri is very fast, but yeah, Perez is just, he's flying here this weekend, isn't he? At a time, as I mentioned it in first practice, he is under a lot of pressure, and we know he has a 2-year contract, not that contracts mean anything in Formula 1, and we know Singapore is another point for him, but yes, George Russell is on a flyer, like you were saying, Ben.
Yeah, so they have actually allowed him to go and do a decent run on the soft tyre. We're just listening to Verstappen, but we will be keeping an eye on George Russell, because he is on a very good first sector in terms of personal bests, not showing overall best yet, but let's wait and see what this turns out to be for George Russell, and whether it pops him up to that higher list. Lewis Hamilton, his teammate, currently 3rd fastest on an out lap right now, but most of them, of course, are on race pace at this stage, and we'll see how that develops. We've still got just over 8.5 minutes to go in second practice here in Baku, as the sun is dropping away, the shade building up all over the track, and everybody just looking to try and get a little bit more knowledge, understanding of how the cars behave, how the tyres are reacting, so that when we get into the race on Sunday, they've got that knowledge and understand what sort of systems they should go for. Max Verstappen hasn't won in the last 6 Grand Prix, but he is still very much a man who's been looking competitive here in the earlier session, not quite so confident in this session. What have we seen from Charles Leclerc? He was coming into turn 2. There was a car just come out of the pits ahead of him. Oh, that was unfortunate. Listen.
Lewis didn't see it.
No, absolutely right. Lewis did not see him. It was Lewis Hamilton coming out of the pits, and he got to the apex of turn 1 at absolutely the wrong moment, didn't he?
That couldn't have been worse timing if they tried. I think just absolutely didn't see him, and I would guess didn't have Pete Bono, his race engineer, on the radio telling him that he was coming up behind him. So yes, he has ruined that lap for Leclerc.
George Russell has popped up to 9th on the soft tyre, although that's not quite as... I thought he might go a little bit quicker than that, but maybe he's doing something slightly out of sequence with everybody else. Lando Norris, meanwhile, putting together some laps right now as well. But remember, they'll be looking more at race pace. They will not likely be going faster than what we've seen from Charles Leclerc a little while ago. 1:43.484. We've got Bottas having a little bit of an off as well, but managing to get back on again. That was down at turn 1. Probably ran a little bit too deep into the first corner, but he's got it back up and no major problems. Pole record here, 1:40.203 was Charles Leclerc last year, so we're still a little way away from that. Funnily enough, the time that he's done so far is very similar to his lap record, which he set a few years ago at 1:43.009. So 6.5 minutes to go. Let's just have a little look at what happened to Valtteri Bottas. This was down into turn 1, late braking presumably, or back end stepped out, a bit of oversteer. He decided to basically take the car away, not try and correct it too much because it would have spun and could have hit the barrier. That's sensible driving by Valtteri Bottas. He knows this place pretty well, and he stayed out of trouble there. Just having a little look at Lance Stroll, also having an off down an escape road, but actually he didn't really go very deep into the escape road. He just braked late, decided to back off and then reverse and get back on track. So race pace wise, how are things beginning to look, Andrew? Have we got enough info yet? They're still out there really doing this, aren't they?
We're beginning to get a picture. Not really enough laps from Verstappen just yet to get a full picture, and Hamilton's only just started his race run, Ben. So if you give me, we haven't got that long, I realise, only 6 minutes left in the session, but if you give me another lap or two, then maybe we can have a bit of long run corner.
Don't you worry, I'm going to bring you in, Andrew, when it's time.
I dread to think what you're going to say.
Well, let's see what happens. 5.5 minutes, but you get a couple more laps in. It gives us a bit more indication of who's got that decent race pace, but it's certainly Charles Leclerc, who's been up and down today in all sorts of ways. Things that didn't go well for him in FP1, 9th fastest with a crash, not getting out on the soft tyres, going out earlier in this session on the medium tyres, not happy with the way the car was feeling. The team doing a lot of work on the car, sending him back out, and then finally he's ended up with the fastest lap so far, and I don't think anyone's going to go quicker than that. I did wonder whether George Russell, he's been out on the soft tyres, he's put in the 9th fastest lap. Looks to me as though they may be playing a little bit with not necessarily going for virtually no fuel. They might have sent him out with a reasonable amount of fuel, and it's more about a sort of race pace on the soft tyre that they're looking at right now. It's popped him in between the two Haas cars. Nico Hülkenberg currently in 8th place and Ollie Behrman in 10th, and it has pushed down the Williams that we were talking about. Alex Albon down into 13th position now, Colapinto in 14th position. Down the order, the ones that are looking as though when we get to qualifying tomorrow may well struggle to get out of Q1. No great surprise that it's the two Alpines, one of the Saubers at the moment, but I think the other Sauber probably could well be in that drop zone again.
They could, unfortunately. Okay, Ben, are you ready for the best part of FP2? If you are needing a nap, now might be the time. I might dig into this chocolate bar that's been staring at me for the last hour. It's over to you, Andrew.
Long Run Corner with Andrew Benson.
You can go the distance, we'll find out in the long run. In the long run.
The producer was a bit slow with his cue there for the music, wasn't he? But anyway, so it's not the easiest set of long runs to interpret. Lando Norris, for example, seems to have spent most of his time in traffic, and Lewis Hamilton has only done one representative lap, which makes things very difficult to give a prediction for him. But if we take the fastest drivers from the top teams, we've basically got a situation where Oscar Piastri is a couple of tenths faster than Sergio Perez. Piastri's averaging a 1 minute 48.6 and Perez 1 minute 48 just under 9. Hamilton is also on 48.6, but 2 laps is not really a big enough data set to make a conclusion about him. Sainz seems to have been struggling on his long run, and Leclerc hasn't done one. So I think on the basis of today, of what we can see, I would say McLaren have a slight advantage over Red Bull. The only proviso to that, of course, is that it's Perez, not Verstappen. If you're wondering why I'm not mentioning Verstappen, it's because he's averaging 7 tenths slower than Perez, so something's wrong there. That's not Verstappen's normal pace. But Verstappen hasn't looked actually that much quicker than Perez, so I don't think we can assume necessarily. Here's Russell's radio.
Box end of this lap. We have an issue with the car.
All right, so not the greatest of sessions for George Russell at all, with an engine problem delaying his getting out onto the track, and then some other problem making him come back in prematurely. But I don't think we can assume that Verstappen's 7 tenths off Perez, but I don't think we can also assume from the evidence of today that he's the usual 3 tenths quicker than him either. Perez has looked on the pace so far. So I would say it does, although the timing sheets don't seem to be saying this, the long runs, which normally give us a more accurate reading of pace, especially when we've had such a fractured session with Leclerc running late, and Russell not being in the picture, and Hamilton running a bit late too, and Verstappen obviously having problems with his balance, I would say it looks like not that different from the last few races. McLaren, the quickest car, Red Bull a couple of tenths behind them so far. But obviously, it's hard to make conclusions because we don't know engine modes particularly.
Yeah.
Quite often, Red Bull run a lower engine mode.
I do feel as though Max might be on a low engine mode today.
Yeah, and we haven't seen Leclerc's pace, although he's just going out now, I think, on a race run. On the medium tire, but we haven't got time enough to see how that's going to go for him.
Low-speed corners just being shown on one of the graphics at the moment. So Verstappen, a bit like earlier, and Perez, they've got the low-speed pace ahead of Hamilton and the two Ferraris. So as we were saying earlier, it does look as though Red Bull are very much focusing on that low-speed pace rather than straight-line pace. But as we said, if they're running their engines a little bit lower today, that might change tomorrow, mightn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point of practice, isn't it? I suppose you have a little tinker with what you can, and this is one of the annoying things about practice, actually, is we never know the fuel loads, we don't know the engine modes, and so, Benny, joking aside, does a good job with the long run data just to try and disseminate it all. I know he's laughing at me now, but it is tricky we don't know their programs, so we can do the best we can as we ride on board with Sergio Perez. He's had a little mishap, has he? Oh, crikey, O'Reilly, a bit too close to the Ferrari. And
apparently that's been investigated. Listen.
What is he doing?
Yeah, it's not clear to me.
Yeah, they were very close.
Yeah, that was Sainz in the way of Perez when Perez was on a good lap, so that's why he was pretty frustrated. Probably won't be too many penalties today, but that will be a factor tomorrow. If you do that in qualifying, you will pick up a penalty.
Yeah, you absolutely will. That was blocking, basically.
Yeah. And it's easily done here. I think the way of the layout of this track, even these top-level drivers who know they want to try and keep out of somebody's way, because if they don't, they'll get blocked later. But this is not an easy track always to get out of the way, is it?
No, and there are a lot of blind corners. We're talking about the tight and twisty section, and obviously that's the job of part of the job of the race engineer to say who's coming up behind who. But can you get the message there quickly enough? They do all bunch up. We've seen it here in Baku before. There can be instances you can't see going around a corner, and we do have very close calls, and that was a very close call.
It was, yes. Thankfully it wasn't an accident, but it did come close. Checker flag is out, so the second practice session is now completed, and it has ended with Charles Leclerc setting the pace by 0.006 of a second from Sergio Perez, and Lewis Hamilton, who we're actually just riding with as he takes it fairly easy on the way back and is cooling his hands. He was saying how hot he was in the car. He's actually sticking his hands up and just trying to get a bit of cool air. He's third fastest, just 0.06 away from Leclerc. So it's very, very close between the top three, Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes. But we never got Norris to do a representative lap, and I think he would have probably been pretty much up there as well. So fourth fastest, Carlos Sainz in the other Ferrari. So both Ferraris in the top four went well. Oscar Piastri ended up the faster of the McLarens, but as I say, Lando didn't get a clear run in. Sixth fastest, Max Verstappen, the championship leader, down in sixth place at the moment. Not looking quite as confident as he did earlier, but there is still a lot of work to be done overnight. He was fastest in FP1, remember. We're just having a little look on board with Lance Stroll as he came down the end of the start-finish straight. Yeah, he decided to back out. But Lance actually did a decent job. Seventh fastest, ahead of Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas in eighth. George Russell, after a difficult session, the late engine replacement and then something else towards the end, but he ended up ninth. And Ollie Behrman was 10th fastest in the second Haas. 11th fastest, Yuki Tsunoda, ahead of Fernando Alonso, who was 12th quickest, having done a faster job earlier on today. Then the two Williams, Alex Albon and Franco Colapinto. Valtteri Bottas 15th, Daniel Ricciardo was 16th, Lando Norris 17th on the list, but that does not represent his pace at all. He was much faster than that, but didn't get a clear run. The two Alpines, though, sadly down at the bottom end, I think that is genuine. I think the danger is we'll lose both Alpines in Q1 when we get to qualifying tomorrow. And Zhou Guanyu, who's struggled a bit in qualifying throughout the course of the year with the Sauber, he ended up slowest of all, down in 20th position. So there we go. But it does leave it nice and wide open, doesn't it, going into third practice tomorrow morning and then all important qualifying.
Yeah, what a great weekend we have, because we have these four teams, the Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren and Red Bull, and we don't actually really know who's quickest. We're seeing the different setups they're playing with. Should they be quickest on the straight? Should they be quickest on in the tight, twisty Castle, Old Town section? And that's just going to evolve as the weekend goes on. The track is still quite dirty. It is clearing a bit, but probably not at the rate that any of us were really expecting. And yeah, the track will evolve. We know it will. We could do with a couple of junior series coming through to lay down some rubber, but it is setting us up. And Perez seems to have, let's say, woken up and has been very impressive this weekend. And Verstappen, having had a very good morning, doesn't look like a happy bunny anymore.
Very, very impressive. Yeah, let's see if Sergio Perez can put away all of the difficulty that he's had earlier on this year and come back to a place where he's done so well in the past, having taken 2 victories, more wins here than anybody else has had so far. So we will be bringing you all of the action tomorrow, and it'll start off with third practice. We'll be on air at 9:25 in the morning. That final practice session obviously is going to be a key build-up to qualifying, give us an idea of how it is going to go, but it is looking very open at the moment after Ferrari's Charles Leclerc set the pace despite an accident earlier on today, and he is looking for his 4th pole position in a row at this Baku circuit. But remember, despite all of that great qualifying he's done here in the past, he has never won this race. Is that going to be a change in story, or is it going to be about Red Bull? Well, it's been great to have you with us, and we'll hope you be with us again tomorrow. This is an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.